or should not be understated,
Right.
because it is essential to move a community's politics from point A to point B. And so that's a part of the political equation that we have to begin brand new, no matter where we are.
Right.
You know, whether we're here or there. But even more than that, or not, or as much as that, it's important for black folk, the black electorate, to realize that politics is 24/7, 365. It is not when the election comes around. It is for black folk to understand that politics is a daily enterprise. And when election time comes around, the community needs to be strategically organized and deployed in order to appropriately engage in the voting process. And apart from the voting process, which is one aspect of the political power equation, perhaps the most important thing is holding elected officials accountable. And you cannot hold them accountable by your vote every 2 years or whenever. You can only hold them accountable if you are organized strategically in your community. And that means your neighborhood. Your neighborhood should be politically organized in terms of some people within the neighborhood should be responsible for keeping contact and lines of communication open to others in that neighborhood, so that if the need arises, a critical mass of people, not just one or a few people, can show up at the politician's office.
Right.
And the politician must listen to you, must entertain you, simply because of your numbers and the fact that you are attentive to what's going on and are on top of the situation. But what even helps that situation further is if within your neighborhood political organization, you have a political fund.
Okay.
So that when it's time for the politician to run for office, your representation shows up and informs the politician, hey, we are prepared to contribute to your campaign. We don't just want to hold your feet to the fire. We want to finance your campaign. And you are doing this as a community because you are sophisticated enough to know that if you don't do it, other interest groups will do it and leave you as a community, as their constituents, completely out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to get into the picture, and we can only get into the picture if we begin to do politics in a different way. And it can start by party building. And at this point in the VI, the major party, the Democratic Party, seems to be defunct, fragmented, to say the least.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure the leadership is aware of that because they lost Government House to an independent, and the results of the election demonstrate how fragmented and weak they are as a party. Therefore, they have to begin a building process. Now, that building process can work in two ways. Well, it will work from the top down because those Democratic political leaders now realize that they have to put their ducks in a row if they want to regain the State House and shore up their majority so they could minimize the diminishing returns, which is obvious at this point. But at the grassroots level, it's important for the fellowship, the electorate, to understand that we can't wait for the leadership to organize the party and hopefully trickle down power. We have to organize the party from the grassroots up. And from the grassroots up, in that scenario, you could determine leadership. Right now, leadership is anybody who could get their political objectives financed and win. And we, as the grassroots electorate, fellowship, won't have anything to say about that because we haven't done our homework. What we need to do to become a politically viable community, to change the way politics is done in our area. Now, if the fellowship, if the electorate develop strength, then the leadership, one, will be held accountable, and two, as time goes by, the leadership will be from the fellowship, and they will then have the best interests of the grassroots and the community on their agenda. But even if they don't, the grassroots will be organized sufficiently to hold that leadership and any leadership accountable. And so that's where we are essentially as a community in the Virgin Islands or in the States. We are a black community that needs to do some serious political homework. And one of the things that is our shortcoming, apart from that homework that we need to do to understand how politics works and the process, one of our biggest weaknesses is the fact that we don't do short and long range planning. If we don't plan, we plan to fail. And if we're going to develop political power, that's not going to happen next election. We have to have a strategy that has a short range and a long range plan. So we probably couldn't do anything significant in a short range shorter than 4 years, for example. So if I was suggesting or inspiring or participating in the planning process on the grassroots level, I would say that, well, we need to sit down and come up with a 4-year plan. And a critical part of the 4-year plan is voter education and voter registration in your respective neighborhood or community. And if you get into those two particular critical areas, elementary areas, political education and political registration, we could begin to generate the numbers that can be consequential in any election. In addition to that, in order to develop a political movement or a political organizing initiative effectively, you got to have bread, you got to have money. You see? And that is something we are not accustomed to doing, investing in our politics. We spend money, we don't invest money. And we don't even spend money in our politics. We spend money on stuff that we buy and we can see, and it's gone or used up or depreciates. Cars and so many other things. So spending money is not really the way in which you use money to build an effective political initiative. You have to invest money in your politics. Now, the difference between investing and spending, like I said, if you spend money, it's gone. If you invest money, then there is an inherent expectation on the ROI, the return on your investment. So our politics requires that in addition to the legwork and organizing work and the political work and the education work that's required, we have to do economic work, which is about generating funds to invest in politics. And so in the capsule, those are some of the things that we have to consider when we think in terms of 21st century politics, moving us as a community from point A to point B in this 21st century. We've been dealing with 19th and 20th century politics that has gotten us to where we are. And that's, comparatively speaking, nowhere. We're on dead zero. And to make that point a little bit clearer, let me just make the observation that in the States, for example, black folk have been the minority population since we came to America, or since we were brought to America. And black folk are the largest and oldest majority or minority, political minority in the States. Now, some say that Hispanics outnumber black folk in the States. I don't particularly buy that, because when you talk about black folk, you're talking about a phenotype, skin color, whereas when you talk about Hispanic, you're talking about language, or Latinos, you're talking about language. So those two don't jive. And if you look deeper into the equation, you realize that if some Hispanics, or perhaps the majority of Hispanics, if they didn't open up their mouth on sight, they would be black. You see? So we have to be careful on how this sophisticated approach to politics, how we receive this level of sophistication, which keeps us on our back foot. But apart from the fact that black folk are the oldest and most numerous minority, political minority in the States, black folk, as we speak, according to my observation, are the weakest minority as compared to other political minorities. And when I talk about other political minorities, I'm talking about Hispanics, I'm talking about women, Asians, gays. All of those political minorities have more political leverage than black folk. And one of the reasons is the fact that they are organized a little better, but they are really on top of financing their political initiatives. Gays, for example, put up the money, as well as put up their bodies to change the nature of how they are dealt with. And we can see that. Women are listed as a minority, but in real time, they are not a minority. Because when you think in terms of women, you have to think in terms across racial and ethnic lines. So women are not a minority, but when you look at minority initiatives that were primarily provided for black folk, vis-a-vis affirmative action and other things of that nature, black folk do not get the benefits as compared to other political minorities. And so we find ourselves in a serious dilemma. And no one will get us out of this dilemma. We have to extricate ourselves from this position of weakness, and we cannot do it fragmented as we are. We cannot do it doing politics the way we do politics. We have to change the way we do politics. And we have to view the political process as a whole, as opposed to this party versus that party. Because the macro political players and the macro political powers, or let's say, for example, the economic cats who manipulate politics, they give to this party and they give to the other party. So they are never out of the equation. And so that's something that we have to begin to realize as a community. We can't be out of the equation because we are predominantly in this camp. Because if we are predominantly in this camp, Democratic Party, for example, we are ignored, we are taken for granted by that party because they don't have to do anything for our vote, because we have this emotional connection to the Democratic Party. And so, no matter what happens, on the face of it, where are we going to go? To the enemy? You see? So, we have to think in terms of how politics work. In the 21st century, we can't buy the friend versus enemy political paradigm. We have to understand how politics works. And politics works, electoral politics, because there's a difference between electoral politics and community politics. We have to make that distinction. But we're talking about electoral politics. And electoral politics works by way of leverage. You have to leverage one against the other. And if you're only engaged or involved or registered in one, you can't leverage nothing. You are in the basket, and you are subject to whatever crumbs are thrown into your basket, and you fight over it because the basket is full of, the crab thing. Everybody wants something. See? And so we have been sold a bill of goods in terms of how we've been doing politics. And our political leadership, which is primarily the civil rights leadership orthodoxy, that is the way in which we do politics, based upon civil rights paradigm, which deals with minority political power and how minorities do politics, particularly in the States. But in here, in the BI, it's the same thing. Because although we are the majority, we're playing minority politics. Because we cannot leverage anything. So all we can do is beat, complain, throw blows, get upset. We can't do anything that touches on a political maneuver because we are not organized in such a way to carry out an effective political maneuver. So we're into jobs, and that's how they hit us. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And patronage. So you're down with this club, this group, or what have you, and because you are down with them, then you can get a job, you can get a gig, you can get a contract. And that's how that works. But we're playing against each other as opposed to playing against the powers that be and exerting leverage on where the power is. So that's what it generally looks like. So what we see now is that the Democratic Party are our friends, although the root of the Democratic Party was based in white supremacy and how that operates. And it continues to operate within the Democratic Party and outside of the Democratic Party, because we're all in the same boat in the Democratic Party and we can't go anywhere, so we are subject to whatever they do. We can't fight discrimination effectively, apart from going to court. And we know in the VI what happens in the court with respect to the powers that be. You cannot get justice in the courts because our black brothers and sisters are in political positions to manipulate the court, and if you are not a part of their patronage regimen, then you're done. And so that's where we are as a community, here or there. And hopefully the state of political affairs in the Virgin Islands is of such where we have hit bottom and we realize as a community there's no place for us to go. So we will begin to hopefully evaluate the best moves forward in the 21st century, because the civil rights movement, as a practical matter, is defunct. There are no more civil rights leaders, and civil rights is not what it used to be. Civil rights in its formative years was about empowering black folk and fighting the discrimination that black folk were the victims of. And so that was what civil rights was about, but it's not about that anymore. Civil rights is no longer about black empowerment. Civil rights is now about social justice. Now, that's laudable, but social justice is not peculiar to the needs of black folk as they are such as they are, and as they will be going forward in the 21st century. As a matter of fact, black elected officials cannot talk black. They can't even mention black, or they don't mention black. You see? Whether here in the VI or in the States, they don't deal with black consciousness or the needs of black folk, which are peculiar to black folk because of our peculiar history. They don't deal with that, you see, because that might minimize the extent to which they can get their campaigns financed by others. So they can't talk about black folk and the needs of the black community in particular, especially in the States. In the States, you're not going to find a black elected official who will speak specifically to black people, because his career, his political career, or her political career will be threatened. And in fact, if you are a black leader, like for example, Jesse Jackson, for example, when he ran for president, he had to diss black folk. He had to diss some black folk in order to get mileage in his campaign. And he did diss many, particularly Sister Soldier and the black consciousness movement. He stuck to the civil rights paradigm, which is irrelevant to black folk as we speak. But you have some folk, like Al Sharpton, who would suggest that there's a need for a third black civil rights movement. Now, where's that going? That's not going anywhere. But it can get certain people positions of financial well-being, or the illusion of power. And now they have us tricked in terms of the popular narrative, because whereas during the earlier days, back in the day, political leaders were political leaders. Now political leaders are celebrities. You have celebrities who speak as political leaders and are accepted in the media and other venues as political leaders, the leaders of black folk. But increasingly you have a population of black folk who are not accepting celebrities as their leaders, who are not accepting the civil rights orthodoxy as their leaders. But there are yet no alternatives. And so this is one of the reasons why I thought it was important for me to write Black Politics 2.0. Because from my experience as a professional organizer during the Civil Rights Movement and during the Black Power movement, it is clear to me that to date, black politics has been Black Politics 101. And it appears to me that Black Politics 101 is what we have in the Virgin Islands and in the States. We haven't moved beyond Black Politics 101 in the civil rights era and the civil rights political paradigm. So there is a need for Black Politics 2.0. So I don't particularly lay out a prescription for Black Politics 2.0 in the book, although I have one. What I think is more important than mine or anyone's prescription of where we need to go in the 21st century in terms of Black Politics 2.0, what I believe is important is that there is a conversation that takes place in the Black community in the Virgin Islands and in the States, a conversation which explores where do we go from here politically. And that conversation needs to examine politics in terms of how we have been doing politics and politics as it works in the larger community. Politics in terms of leverage and how politics is leveraged to enable forward movement. And so my book is primarily polemical in that we hope to inspire a broad-based conversation on where we go from here. Now I know I've talked a lot, and this is a conversation maybe you brothers might want to.
No. Just everything's good.
Okay.
Everything's good.
All right. Well, I just checking. But so this conversation we're spearheading here with It's Your Perspective talk show, and the conversations with Gary James. And so within this format, we hope to generate feedback and a conversation that extends beyond the Virgin Islands to the States and anywhere else where we are, because we are all over the planet. But our politics has to be tailored to where we are. And so part of our objective here is to tailor our politics based upon the venue that we are discussing. And in this format, I think the appropriate venue is the Virgin Islands as well as stateside. Because, as I said, the politics is similar, although there are some serious differences, apart from the fact that we're the majority here and the minority there. There's similarities just in terms of how we've discussed the Democratic Party and how we deal with and engage the Democratic Party here and there. So these are subjects that we plan to explore in greater depth as we continue on this magnificent venue that these brothers had the insight and imagination and resources to pull off and make available to myself and us as a community in the VI, as well as the states, because no matter where you are in the world, you can access It's Your Perspective talk show.
That's it.
You see? And so it is our objective to inspire you to engage in the conversation that will be taking place on this cutting-edge, high-tech, 21st century venue. And we want to big up my two brethren, Rasu.
He's a messiah.
And David, brother David Christian, for making this venue available to the VI and indeed the world. So we're looking forward to spending time on developing this conversation and this venue, because what these brothers have put in place and in motion can go anywhere and can do many things that we won't speak about at this point. But we have the potential to do profound and great things, and from what I hear from them, that is what the objective is. So I am inspired, and I will continue to be inspired to work with them and make my contribution going forward. So I could perhaps just digress briefly from the Democratic Party and still talk about party politics, but from another perspective. And that is the Republican Party. The party who hates black people. Interestingly enough, the great Martin Luther King and his father were Republican. They were Republican up until the advent of the Civil Rights Movement and the voting rights and civil rights legislation. You see, now that is not spoken of at all, but that happens to be a matter of fact. And it is also a matter of fact that the Republican Party has been positioned and continues to be positioned as a party where black Uncle Toms reside. And so there is quite a bit of emotional inertia, gravity, that is developed from that very popular idea. But let's examine that a little further. we know, as a matter of history, that the modern civil rights movement is, in fact, the second civil rights movement. The first civil rights movement occurred in the 19th century. And it was the brainchild, as it were, of the Republican Party. It was the Republican Party that enabled black folk in the 19th century to move from point A to point B. And as black Republicans, the black community generated elected officials in all areas of government, in the legislatures, that the Democratic Party has yet to eclipse. That's a matter of fact. And the Republican Party and the first civil rights movement occurred after the Civil War in a process they call the period of Reconstruction. The period of Reconstruction was essentially the federal government requiring the federal authorities to enforce the voting rights and civil rights of the black community. And that's how we got our first senators to the United States and members of various local legislatures. It was the Republican Party. And it wasn't until what's called the Great Compromise of, I believe it was 1876, wherein Rutherford Hayes, the Republican president, called back the federal troops to end Reconstruction and the enforcement of civil rights for African Americans. Now, why did that happen? That wasn't just a political whim of Rutherford Hayes. It came about because there was a stalemate in the presidential election of 1876, similar to what occurred with Bush and Gore. That was resolved in the courts in Florida. But the Great Compromise, as it was called, was a deal that was struck between the Republicans and the Democrats. And that deal essentially was, okay, Hayes, Republican, we will permit you to be the president of the United States. However, your mandate is to call those federal troops back and end Reconstruction. And that's what occurred. The deal caused Hayes to pull back the federal troops, and that was the beginning of Jim Crow. That was the beginning of what we know as the Jim Crow laws and the Jim Crow codes And some might recall that there was a place in Tulsa, Oklahoma called the Black Wall Street. And Black Wall Street was simply that, Black Wall Street. When black folk were about business and they established businesses. But with the advent of Jim Crow and the ambivalence of the Republican Party leadership, because they wanted the presidency, they became ambivalent for black folk and their rights. But the Republican Party was established in 1854 as an abolitionist movement, the abolition of slavery. That was the birth of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party embraced black folk, while the Democratic Party and Jim Crow was about white supremacy and the Ku Klux Klan. Now, after civil rights, as Lyndon Baines Johnson said, when I signed this civil rights bill, the Democratic Party will lose the South for 40 years. That was his prediction. And that's what happened. See? And so many former Republicans became staunch, stiff Democrats. People like Jesse Helms and forget the Bird, whatever his first name. But you had these guys who were former Republicans who became Democrats because of what occurred in the 19th century. See? And so this is how the political parties play musical chairs, for example. Now, the Republican Party now is conservative. They talk about going back to their conservative roots. But the fact remains, the Republican Party was never conservative. Never conservative. The Republican Party, from its inception, was progressive, diverse, and eclectic. In fact, they called themselves back in the 19th century radical Republicans. But after the Civil Rights Movement, the Republicans changed their stripes because they had to come from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party because they didn't want to have anything to do with civil rights and the inclusion of blacks and minorities in a white supremacist party. So they took their white supremacy to the Republican Party. And so in 1964, there was the birth of the conservative movement. The conservative movement, with people like Barry Goldwater the conservative movement, because they know how to play politics with their numbers and cucumbers money. The Conservative Party, after 1964, they made it their business to infiltrate the Republican Party and change its nature, change the platform of the Republican Party. And that's what occurred. So now it's about Republican conservatism, which is a sophisticated formulation. The fact is, the Republican Party had a conservative wing that, because of the advent of civil rights, the conservative wing, who were once conservative Democrats, the conservative wing infiltrated the Republican Party and turned it conservative. So now conservative is synonymous with the Republican Party. But the Republican Party has never been conservative, and it is not conservative now, but it is run by the conservative wing who infiltrated the party. And so hence you have a national platform which deals with issues that are essentially social conservative, which was once the bastion of the Democratic Party. And so you have this new formulation called the Tea Party, which has effectively taken over the platform of the Republican Party and turned the Republican Party into the popular term conservative. But it's a Republican Party and a Democratic Party. That's what's happening in real time. Each party has a conservative wing and a liberal wing. But based upon what time it is, in their view, they appear in conservative garb. And their current conservative garb is within the Republican Party, and the conservatives have effectively taken control of the Republican Party platform. But before civil rights, it was the Democrat conservatives who ran the Democratic Party. But the liberal wing challenged the internal structure and wrested control from the conservative Democrats. Just as now the conservative wing of the Republican Party wrested control from the liberals or the progressives or the eclectic Republican Party. So what do we have? We have political parties that have morphed from one position to another. They have reversed their political positions. Now, we're not in that at all as black folk. You see, we don't deal with it on that level. You see, because we are just pawns in the political process because we don't know how politics is done. And so we play party politics like rah-rah, as opposed to political party politics or political power party politics. So we into the social stuff when others take politics serious and they do things that they need to do for themselves and their community because they take the process serious and they understand how it works and they work on it 24/7, 365. So, on the other hand, we're laid back, not just in St. Croix and the Virgin Islands, we're laid back as a people in terms of politics and how we do politics. It's about a social thing. It's not about a power thing, you see? And we're not accustomed to playing power anything. So it's not something that comes to us naturally, but it's something that we have to begin to engage in, lest we remain in bondage, physical or mental, psychological. That's where we are.
All right, that's where we are right now, Gary. Give us real quick what's in store for part 3. Real quick, and then we're gonna go over some stuff here. And
well, part 3, we're going to look at perhaps what constitutes minority politics from a racial standpoint. You see, race is is an idea that has been presented to us and has developed a life of its own. But there is no scientific basis for racial distinction. We are all human beings, and the idea of multiple races is a phantom. It is something that was developed to achieve specific economic and social objectives. And so you have now this idea that there's a black race, there's a white race, there's a yellow race, there's a red race, there's this multiple racial paradigm, which, as I said, has no basis in science. But it forms the basis of how politics is organized. Politics is organized around racial lines and racial distinctions. So we're going to touch on that next time.
December 4th, Gary will be back, 8 p.m. 8 to 9:30. Gary will be back to talk about, I guess, the continuing conversation.
Well, it's the continuing conversation of Politics 2.0, but it deals with the race-based paradigm.
Okay.
And it cuts across areas such as religion, for example, and such as race as a reality.
Okay.
Wherein, in fact, it is a phantom.
All right. That's author Gary James, his new book, Black Politics 2.0. He'll be back on December 4th. He does a every other week segment, so next time will be December 4th. Thanks again for coming out real quick and sharing some knowledge with us. Kind of giving us some history. It's all kind of interesting how it all kind of comes about.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I want to look at our current political situation in a historical context, because that will help us to appreciate what it is and where we need to go from here. And so I look forward to December 4th on being with you. And I would just like to close by saying I just love what you brothers are doing. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
There's
Gary.
nothing you can do about it.
All right.
That's
There
it, right?
is. That's it.
That's it right there, man. This is the It's Your Perspective Talk Show, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 p.m. until. We just wrapped up with Gary James talking about Black Politics 2.0. We're off until next week, Tuesday. We got more guests lined up for next week. Real